Mm-hmm. Oh, there, Doc. Yeah. Great. Oh, great. That's you saw the movie? Movie, such a good. Wonderful. Oh, there you are.
Hello.
Hello. That's great. So, can you just how are you doing this morning?
Doing well, doing well. How are you?
That's great. And we're just gonna go. Or I guess it's good afternoon for you. Oh, almost. It's 11:59 for you. What's
Yeah.
the weather like in New York?
We actually are having a spring day, which is nice. It was pretty chilly lately, but this day is quite relatively warm and sunny.
Well, that's good. I guess it's going the wrong direction. I wish you could send some of that our way. It's kind of cold and chilly and rainy here in Southern California. So,
Uh,
do you prefer being called Tem, or what do you prefer?
Tem's great.
Okay. I mean, I'll introduce your full name, but I just want to make sure we get your call people what they want to be called. So, how are we on sound? Is this good, Manny? His could come up a little bit. Can we turn him up a little bit? Are we ready? I think we're just going to go get going, and we can adjust on the fly because I don't want to lose any time. And it is 9 o'clock. It is 9 o'clock Pacific. It is noon Eastern in New York time. And welcome to the forum at All Saints Church. My name is Mike Kinman. My pronouns are he, him. I'm the rector, the senior pastor here at All Saints. Everyone turn around and wave at the camera. Say hi to everyone watching us online. Great to have you all here. Just want to, before we start, and I'll probably do this again at the end, I'm holding up a ballot. I hope everyone who is in here and who is watching online, at least in the state of California, where our primary election, we have an election on Tuesday, has filled out their ballot and has either mailed it or will mail it or will put it in the box. I'm going to walk across the street after church this morning and put this in the box. Voting is a sacred duty, and the conversation that we are going to have this morning will show us, it will really be a part of how important it is that we participate in this political process. And so I'm deeply grateful to have as our guest Temidayo Aganga-Williams, who is, I want to just thank Adichie Byerly here. Adichie, this is the great nephew, the grandnephew? Your great nephew he is the great nephew of Adichie Byerly. And Adichie, thank you so much for making this connection so we can do this. Tem is an experienced litigator bringing strong government credentials to his representation of clients facing complex government enforcement actions, internal investigations, congressional oversight, and high-stakes legal civil litigation. Most recently, he served as Senior Investigative Counsel for the House Select Committee to investigate the January 6th attack on the Capitol. Before that, he was an Assistant U.S. Attorney in the Criminal Division of the U.S. Attorney's Office for the Eastern District of New York. As Senior Investigative Counsel, he was responsible for investigating the facts, circumstances, and causes of the attack and issues relating to the peaceful transfer of power. In that role, he conducted depositions and interviews of dozens of witnesses, including senior advisors to former President Trump, provided legal and strategic guidance on novel congressional investigation issues, coordinated the presentation of evidence for nationally televised hearing, and contributed to the Select Committee's final report. Wow, that's a lot. And so first of all, welcome to All Saints Church. Great to have you here virtually. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me. It's good to be here.
So you were working for the U.S. Attorney in the Criminal Division of the U.S. Attorney's Office for the Eastern District of New York. Did you get a phone call? Did this come out of the blue? How did you become part of this committee? And what were your first thoughts when someone asked you to consider this?
So yeah, the committee was passed by, originally there was going to be a joint commission, which meant that the Senate and the House would have come together to investigate what happened on the 6th, the way we did with 9/11. That failed in the Senate, And then former Speaker Pelosi took it up in the House and passed that resolution in July of 2021. And I first got the phone call by a former supervisor who used to be in the U.S. Attorney's Office, which for those who may not know, meaning we were federal prosecutors. And she left and was working in the Senate for Homeland Security Committee at the time of the attack. So she had begun part of the investigation from the Senate side. When she moved over to the House side to help conduct that investigation, the team was built out with an idea of looking at a lot of former federal prosecutors or current, because as federal prosecutors, you conduct large-scale, quick investigations that really have to handle a large amount of information, a large amount of witnesses, and typically complex legal concepts. So she sent me a text on a Wednesday, I remember, and asked me, hey, we're staffing this committee. Would you have any interest? And of course, I was like, are you joking? Yes, I'm interested. And on Thursday, I spoke to my future boss, just an informal conversation. A few days later, on that Monday, I had a full interview, and I got the job. And that afternoon, I told the Department of Justice that I was leaving to go to DC because I actually had to resign from the DOJ to go work for Congress and be a lawyer there.
Right, because you can't work for two branches of government at the same time, right? So.
Well, you actually can.
Oh, really? Oh, okay.
Yeah, there are things, we call them details, where you work for one either agency and it happened within one branch, but you can be detailed to a second branch. So in the abstract, it's possible that prosecutors could have been detailed, which would have been not supervised by the DOJ, but basically lent over to Congress. There was a decision made at the highest levels, way above my pay grade, that no one would be detailed, which in retrospect was a great decision because, as we all know, there were recommendations for criminal charges, and we didn't want the appearance that the DOJ sent over prosecutors who still worked or were paid by the DOJ to then recommend charges to be sent back to the DOJ.
Right. So one of the strategies that Donald Trump has used throughout his life when he is charged with something is to attack the litigators, attack the prosecutors, attack whoever is charging him. Did you have did it give you pause at all that you might be making yourself a target of this person who has the sort of incredible resources to target people at his disposal?
We certainly thought about it. I mean, I think I would answer that in two ways. For myself, I didn't have a lot of concern. I think part of that is because of the work I was doing as a former prosecutor, in that you're dealing, I did a lot of cartel prosecutions, and you are concerned, you're dealing gang prosecutions. So you already are predisposed to thinking about a level of danger or exposure in your work. I think what concerned me was thinking more so about my family. It's one thing to sign up for a job yourself and assume a risk. It's another thing that if you were somehow became a target, then those around you could get basically, some collateral fallout from that. And that was my concern. But as I led up and joined the job, you did what you can as far as lowering your internet footprint, as far as connecting yourself to your family members online and whatnot. But besides that, it was such a historic opportunity, I couldn't turn it down.
That's good. Well, can you just sort of walk us through both the scope of the work that you were given and the actual work of the committee?
Yeah. So what might be helpful is to talk about what a normal committee looks like. So you have what are called standing committees, which means those are just permanent committees that either are in the House or the Senate, and they have an area of work that they legislate in, and they conduct investigations in order to determine whether to pass a bill. We were a select committee, which there are other kinds of select committees, but those are temporary committees that are established to investigate a specific thing, and then they will disband, which is the idea. What made our committee different is that, frankly, it was run a lot more like a U.S. Attorney's Office. It was run like a DOJ prosecutor style investigation. So of the 20-something lawyers that were on the committee, I think 15 of us were former prosecutors. So that was really, it was run in in a different way. And it was conducted what we would call like a bottom-up investigation. So in Congress, when you're investigating something, you want to know more about what Facebook has been doing on something. You call Mark Zuckerberg, you call the CFO, and they testify to Congress. That's not how the DOJ would do an investigation of a gang or a criminal enterprise. You start at the bottom. You talk to the guys at the bottom and you work way up and you build your story and your narrative of the facts. And at the end, you're looking at the guy at the top, for our purposes, Donald Trump. So we conducted an investigation in that way. And what that looks like, I would explain, is kind of in three parts. First, there's the fact gathering. And what that looks like is issuing a lot of subpoenas, conducting informal interviews, conducting depositions, which are, as you expect, the more formal transcribed process. And that's just trying to learn what happened. I mean, for us, one of the ways we did that initially was, frankly, reading articles, because by the time we got up and going, the media had been reporting and investigating what happened from the day it happened. So they really had a leg up on us. So we just had to take in a large amount of information very quickly, then turn around and go get more information. So you have that fact gathering process that went on a long time. And then eventually it was about preparing and telling the American people the story during our hearings. And that happened over the summer of 2022. We did, I believe, 9 hearings, and it took all that information and how do you tell a cohesive, compelling story that people will watch on primetime television. And then the last step of the work was the report, which is taking all that we've learned and done and putting that in a historical record that people can read and digest for years to come.
So let me just jump into a part of that, which is you really just named that this was not just a congressional hearing, this was a global media event.
Yeah.
And as you were preparing to present your report to the select committee, how much of that went into your thoughts around your preparation of that you really have this dual role, or did you see it as a dual role? Did you see, no, this is just for the committee, or how much of it was, we need to present something compelling to a global media audience? In other words, how important was the court of the public opinion compared to the court of the select committee?
Yeah, so you conduct the investigation always focused on where the facts and evidence lead you. But the same way in a criminal prosecution is the same thought we had of you still have to be able to tell a story. When you conduct a criminal investigation, that may at times end up with a trial. And instead of the American public, you have a jury. And you have to think about, okay, how do I take all that I've done and I believe to be true and convince the jury beyond a reasonable doubt that this crime occurred and this person should be convicted? So similarly, we had the conversations and the discussions from the beginning of this story has to be told. It's not just about finding out what happened, but people have to hear it and be able to digest it and understand it. And there's also the historical concerns of how does the story get told for American people in the future? And one of the critical things that we did that was different is we really relied heavily on video recorded depositions. Typically in a congressional investigation before us, you would have what's basically like a court reporter. Someone's typing down what's being said, and that becomes the only record of what was said in that interview. We had cameras and recorded all of our depositions, which really was a game changer because it allowed us to have a visual medium to tell that story to the American public in the hearings. Also importantly, what we did is actually brought on the former head of ABC as someone who has deep experience in telling stories in compelling ways. Lawyers can tell stories to a jury, yes, but it's still that's something different than telling stories to an entire nation, an entire world. So we had TV professionals come in and help us take all that work and tell it in a coherent but entertaining way. Because they have the experience of knowing what kind of clips are going to make people interested, what kind of clips could go viral, what kind of clips are going to be compelling emotionally. So they were really partners in making the hearings so we could have those hearings that people really were drawn to. So,
well, and first of all, let me say, good job. I mean, what you presented was really fantastic and powerful. I don't know if you can hear the applause in here, so I'm not alone in this opinion. Sort of a couple things. So, I, like many of us, were riveted to that testimony and to the report. one of the frustrating things for me, and I want you to kind of fact check me on this, is that it appeared that A, you could subpoena someone and they could just say, no, I'm not going to testify. And it also seemed that people could pretty much say whatever they want, even lie, without really discernible consequence. Am I right about that, or am I wrong about that? And so if I'm right, why is that, and how do you deal with that?
So I think what's really important to understand is how criminal investigations work versus congressional investigations. So when I was a criminal prosecutor, your ability and power to compel is far stronger, right? If the DOJ, the way we would build a case, for example, you would come in, we would interview, but typically when someone's coming in, we may already have evidence that they've committed a crime. We can charge them, and going to prison is quite the negotiating a tool. So when someone lies to you, first off, lying to a federal official in and of itself, not under oath, not anything else, that is a felony. So if you come in and you were speaking to me and an FBI agent and you lied, you already committed a crime, no matter whether I had evidence about the thing I was actually investigating you for. But if you're having material lies to us about what we asked you, that's already a crime. So that's one thing. Two, if someone doesn't compel you, if someone doesn't follow subpoena, it's a lot easier for me as a criminal prosecutor to go to a judge and frankly have the marshals come and take you into custody and physically bring you to come testify. So all these various tools you have as a prosecutor, you don't have that as a congressional investigator, because when you do congressional investigations, the purpose of that is legislative. So all this investigation is not to prosecute Trump or anyone else. We can't arrest people in the same way, right? This is Congress. So what Congress is built for, the tools it has, are not really in the same way. We don't have the same ability to compel. So when someone, for example, didn't want to come in, the one thing we could do, there were two options basically. One had not been done, I think, since like 1800 and something, which is Congress' inherent power to find someone in contempt, which means Congress would arrest you and put you in a congressional cell. That had not been done in like 150 years. Wow. And frankly, I don't know whether the American public still would have accepted us kind of taking that role if they saw Nancy Pelosi has arrested Mark Meadows and he's sitting now in the Rayburn building in DC until he answers questions. I don't think the American people were kind of built for that. So the second thing we can do is that if you are in contempt of Congress, is that you can refer that to the Department of Justice for prosecution, because right, all prosecution is happening from the executive branch. So, but the way it works practically, it has to be pretty egregious for it to be contempt, right? Mm-hmm. As the word sounds, it's contempt. Right. So it's not, oh, I was 10 minutes late, or I didn't show. No, it's like you have to be really thumbing your nose at the process. So, but there were people, right, who have been convicted, right? People, you have Steve Bannon, you have Peter Navarro, folks who we did refer to Department of Justice, and they were convicted and found in contempt. And Peter Navarro, for example, who was a key Trump advisor and spread a lot of these election lies, he has a prison sentence for not complying. And lastly, most people did comply. I mean, you had the big names of like a Mark Meadows, but one thing Mark Meadows had for him is that he actually gave us a lot of critical information. So yes, he didn't show up for a deposition, but he turned over his text messages, which showed extensive amount of information about what, for example, the former president was doing while the attack was going on. It showed all the right-wing pundits like Laura Ingraham who were saying the only person who can stop the attack is the president. It showed Clara Thomas's wife, Ginny Thomas, reaching out and talking to Mark Meadows and trying to help him return the election. So it's harder to say, was that individual in contempt of Congress when they provided a lot of information and were trying to negotiate but then didn't show up for a deposition? It's tougher. But no question, the power to compel as a criminal prosecutor, it's unmatched. And that's what shows you the difference between, we'll talk about Jack Smith's investigation, I'm sure, right. But there's a lot of tools that he's using and able to use that we couldn't use. Right. But we were successful because I will tell you this, on average, people came in. And to your last point about whether people lie, people did lie. lots of,
Yep.
in my view, lots of big name people lied. I mean, you had Jared Kushner, who could not remember a single thing about anything of importance, right?
Right.
The same way you had Ivanka Trump, who the same way when she was on stand in the civil case in New York about the Trump organization, can't recall a lot of things. She talked to us, she couldn't recall a lot of things. But they came in and they testified, and in a criminal case, if you lied, it's that same point I first made. Right. Lying in and of itself is a federal offense. And the last thing I'll say on this is that we also had time pressure. So we were moving in 1,000 different ways all at the same time. And with a criminal investigation, when you're only worried about a statute of limitations, you can take your time to prosecute someone and force them and do this. With us, unless the information was really critical, you had to keep moving because we had to get the report done.
Well, so thank you. And so let's sort of skip to the end of the process. The committee concluded basically 4 things, as I understand it, that they recommended that the DOJ charge Trump with obstruction of an official proceeding, conspiracy to defraud the United States, conspiracy to knowingly make a false statement, and assisting, aiding, or comforting an insurrection. And that last one is important because that activates Section 3, Article 14, or Section 3 of the 14th Amendment, which would bar him from running for president, which is part of what's in front of the Supreme Court right now. So first of all, sort of a couple things on this. The first is, as you go through this and you're investigating, you are, of course, developing your own opinions.
Yeah.
And how do you feel about the charges that the DOJ has brought? Are they what you hoped? Do you wish they go too far, not far enough? How are you feeling about what has happened since the Select Committee hearing?
So we always, I say for myself, but I think most of my colleagues would agree. Our work was always going to be just step one. We were, I've had some folks tell me, why didn't you guys arrest him? Or why didn't you guys? I'm like, well, we were Congress. We can't arrest the former president. We can't prosecute the former president. It's just not our role. So we were always step one. And if we found evidence of crimes, step 2 would be what we're watching now. That is what Jack Smith is doing. I am very happy with the charges he brought. I mean, there's 2 ways he could have gone. He could have gone with a very expansive indictment, something kind of like what you saw in Georgia with Fani Willis, where you were really telling a story of a wide-ranging conspiracy and you're charging a lot of people. He went down with a slim indictment, only charging the former president. And I think, frankly, with the idea that it's a simpler case to tell, you have so much more culpability when you are the actual president doing this offenses and you would be with all his accomplices. And he did not charge what people call basically seditious conspiracy. And that's one of the charges we suggested, but he didn't charge it. And I think there is a strong logic behind what he did, why he didn't charge it. I think it makes his case more complicated. The litigation around that would be even more extensive than we see now. And I know there's a lot of focus on how that would have barred former President Trump from running again. But frankly, that argument about barring him has been elevated kind of later in the process. But I think, folks, nothing here is going to be the silver bullet, I think, to stop Donald Trump, right? And there's a lot of ways. I think Jack Smith is doing a great job. But at some point, people at the ballot box have to do their role, play their role as well, right? So I think Jack Smith is charging a slim, and there's a thing prosecutors used to say, like slim to win. Right? I mean, sometimes when you charge a sprawling case, that can be more difficult to prosecute. And you're seeing it, for example, in Georgia, right? I don't think Fani Willis was wrong to charge this case she charged. I think she was ambitious and she should have been. But when you have that many defendants, right, her current issues about whether or not she should be disqualified, that's being brought by Mike Roman, which I guarantee most people in your room don't even know who Mike Roman is. Like, that wasn't brought by Donald Trump. That's brought by one of the many defendants that are there, right? You think about how long that case would take to try. I think we have 16 defendants left in Fani Willis's case. She's talking about that case being tried some point into 2025, right? So like when you have sprawling large cases, that's really hard to charge, really hard to prosecute. And frankly, it takes the onus off the person that this is all really about, which is Donald Trump, That's what this is about. Yes, he led a conspiracy, but the same way my old office charged El Chapo, the drug kingpin.
Right.
And Chapo went to trial by himself. He had a massive, massive drug empire. But if you put Chapo on the stand and Chapo's next to the guy 4 levels down, that to some degree can make Chapo look less culpable than standing there by himself. And I think the same logic can apply to the former president.
Well, and so that brings up, and especially when you talk about 2025, it brings up a really interesting point. Part of what the former president has basically tried to claim is that he is above the law because of his status as being a former president. And I think it makes me sort of wonder how much even things like Gerald Ford's pardon of Richard Nixon has sort of ingrained in our national consciousness of like, no, the cost of potentially doing this is too high. What happens? Say he wins in this election. Say the Supreme Court says no, you can be on the ballot, and it's a conservative Supreme Court, and he wins. What happens? Do we have a sitting president standing trial, after he's inaugurated? What do you think happens?
I think practically, if he wins as an inaugurated, the criminal cases are done. Because on the federal level, I don't think there's support that a president can pardon himself. But frankly, if you have a Department of Justice that is responsive to him as the executive, those cases are going to go away if they have not already reached some kind of resolution. I think, and technically, the state is a different sovereign prosecution team, but practically, I think a state county prosecutor is going to try a sitting president. No. So I think that's also done. So I do think it's true that if he wins and there are no convictions, all this is over. And the other last reason why I think it's all over is because all of this works because we all subject ourselves to the authority of the state as everyday people. That's why all of this, as we call civil society, works. We all agree that these are the rules, and we all, when things are done, we agree who's in power, and we agree that when a cop pulls you over, that means something, that you go to the side. And if you have a president who has the power to reject authority, if he doesn't follow these rules, I don't know what we do.
Right.
Because the idea that if he is a president who says, I'm not coming, do we send marshals who technically are under his authority to the executive power to go to the White House to have a gunfight with the Secret Service to say you're coming to court? Right? It just does not work. It would not work. And it especially would not work with a president who has no regard for institutions. So I think there is an importance to, if possible, getting these cases tried before the election. But frankly, it's most important to keep them out of the White House.
Right. So, so amen on that last point. And I was one of the people who throughout Trump's, I almost said first term, throughout Trump's term as president, really maintained that the Constitution held pretty well. When you look at what he tried to do, and the way a lot of things were shut down, that I actually thought that it really showed the resiliency of the Republic, of where we were by the end of those 4 years. My concern now is, first of all, even the political process that you were involved in with the Select Committee, justice has always been subservient to politics in some ways, in the small parts of daily life and writ large. The politics here seems so insurmountable. There's a writer, Yuval Levin, who said there's always been a George Wallace constituency in American politics, except it used to be spread between both parties, and now it's all in one party, and it's controlling it. And that party is just basically blocking everything. I wonder, and again, this is just asking for informed speculation on your part, we have a different Supreme Court right now than we had in Trump's term. How resilient, will the Constitution be able to be in a potential second Trump term? Or are we looking at a whole different landscape here because of the makeup of the Supreme Court?
Yeah, so I think, I might change the premise just a little bit,
Right.
In that things held strong, but I think we were lucky to get out of this the way we did. I don't think we got out of this because our institutions were built so securely, and that's why it didn't happen. I mean, you had the 61 of 62 cases that he lost, right? And the one case he won wasn't dispositive in any way. So yes, the courts did their job there, but he had a multi-pronged plan to overturn the election. And at each level, different individuals stood up and did the right thing, and that's important. But we came, I think, so close to the end in so many ways that it's not, in fact, in my view, truly by design, but by fortune that we didn't have something else. I mean, I'll give you an example. Ashley Babbitt was shot and killed at the Capitol. And, we took a tour of the Capitol to kind of see where everything happened. And you go and you stand where she was shot and you see how close things were. But when Ashley Babbitt was shot, the glass she had broken and was trying to hop into was mere feet away from the chamber, which if they had got in there, the members were all kind of there basically unguarded, right? You would have had a mob who would have had full access to the members of Congress, and in my view, would have killed them. So that was all stopped, but that was really one person who decided to pull a trigger and ended up killing her. And but that was one person's decision. But if you watch the video, there's a world in which that person doesn't do anything or decides, I don't want to be the first one to pull a trigger that day. And you have the members who are all basically slaughtered. You have Vice President Pence, who when his team is trying to get him to a secure location, they think they're preparing for a gunfight. In our hearings, we have the recordings where it talks about they're telling their members of their family. It's kind of like it's like telling their colleagues, like, this may be goodbye, but like we're going, because they don't know what's out there. As they're going to the secure panel, where he ends up going to a secure location to keep him safe, right? So that's that close. So there's a lot of ways where all these things, for example, my old boss, who was my former U.S. attorney when I was a prosecutor, Richard Donahue, when Trump tells him, you just say that you found fraud as a DOJ, and Trump tells him, me and the Republicans will take care of the rest. Just give us like basically a press release. So Rich Donahue says, no, we'll resign. But in all these things, it's not that there were these vibrant institutions that could not be broken in all these different ways. Frankly, it's just individuals who could have gone the other way saying no. And what I think is important is Trump lost a lot of critical states, right? This election, and overall, Biden won by 7 million votes. So on the aggregate, it wasn't a close election. And even on swing states, Biden won all these swing states that mattered. But if you have a world where Trump only has to convince one state to flip, if you had a world where it was only 2 states, and this is my personal view, but I think it's a lot harder to ask even the most diehard Republican, whether it's the Secretary of State in Georgia, to be the first guy to do something illegal, when even if he does it, there are 6 more states that he still loses the election. That becomes more difficult. I think what makes me more concerned is that if you have an even closer election and the people who have to stay strong are a far smaller group, and the pressure is now far greater, the so-called institutions to hold up, I don't know if they do hold up. And so I do think in some ways we are in a weaker place than we were. In some ways we're stronger because we are aware of the threat, we're talking of the threat, we're active, and we are defending the nation against the threat. But I do think it's important for people to realize, both leading up to the attack and on the day of attack, there were so many ways where it could have broken the other way, and it would have been incredibly different. And I think that's what Trump wanted to happen. He wanted the DOJ to fall. He wanted state legislators to fall. He wanted the courts with judges that he appointed to rule for him. And on the day of, while folks are being attacked, while Mike Pence is being told, Trump is being told they want to hang Mike Pence, Trump is okay with it. Yeah. And he's not trying to stop it. He expresses basically, he expresses agreement with it. And while it's all happening, they're still making phone calls to try to stop the certification while they know the Capitol is on attack after he sent these people to the Capitol. So I would be cautiously optimistic that these institutions will hold up again, but I would not want to test them again.
Well, and so that, first of all, it's a clarion call for everyone to vote, and that's everywhere. The other thing is, and I've heard William Barber and many others speak of this passionately, we need to recapture, it feels like, a sense of moral courage in our society, because bullies thrive when moral courage goes into hiding. And there are people who, like, and you named one in a very critical role on January 6th, who had the moral courage to literally stand between the mob and members of Congress. What I wonder is when, and hopefully that stand will happen at the ballot box, but where is the locus of that stand now? I know personally for me, I have very little faith in the judicial branch right now, particularly like the cases that are in front of the Supreme Court, to exhibit what I would call moral courage. And moral courage isn't just agreeing with me, but to me this seems to be a fairly clear-cut case. Do you think, as someone who's made the law your life, we are at a point where we can no longer rely on the system so much, and we really need to just sort of look inside ourselves for the moral courage to resist something far worse happening again?
Yeah, I mean, since 2016, and this is, getting out of my professional expertise, I'm just commenting on politics, but Trump has lost in front of the American people again and again and again, right? The 2018 midterms, lost in 2022, the 2020 election, obviously against Joe Biden, special elections again and again, Democrats have proved to be successful. So I do think when I look at the American people, that does give me comfort in that the American people have not accepted overall Donald Trump. Now, I think it's too close for comfort, right. But again and again, he's not had the success. The American people, the aggregate, I think, have shown that kind of moral courage, have rejected this way of being. As far as the court and our institutions and whether they will have moral courage, I still feel optimism about the courts and whatnot. The Supreme Court, I think, is effectively a political institution at this point. Yep. So I put that to the side. But when I look at even the E. Jean Carroll suit in Georgia and that jury, you have, $80-something million he has to pay. You have Tish James in New York, who, when she brought that case against him, a lot of people in the legal community said that it was a waste of time. She didn't know what she was doing. And now you have a $450 million judgment against him that he cannot bring up the cash right now without, he's trying to find money to go borrow. And every day it's $111,000 in interest, right? You have we call it the hush money case, but it's really an election interference case that's coming to trial in March 25th of this month. And so I do, and these cases, even though I think they're still not moving fast enough, but generally for everyday Americans, the justice system is frustratingly slow, the criminal process. So I do think that we can have, we are seeing lots of good public servants doing their job. Jack Smith's team at great personal exposure to themselves and their family are doing the work. They are fighting day in and day out. Judge Cannon of Florida is doing whatever she can to obstruct the case, in my view. But again, those teams are fighting and pushing hard for the documents case in Florida. So I think all of those give me comfort. And I think, frankly, and this is something we talked a lot about on the committee, and that there was often a difference in perspective in some of the lawyers as to how to look at the state of America. And I think, frankly, I think a lot of it was an incredibly diverse committee. I mean, in all kinds of ways, racially, gender, everything. But one thing that I think is an interesting takeaway is that at times I have found the lawyers of color, one of the things that you often heard said by us was people were so shocked at the state of America because they had romanticized the America they had previously. And the idea of an America on the brink, and I think what it is that we are all feeling it as Americans, but, people who kind of look back who, I wasn't around, but people talk about what the 60s and 50s felt like. People talk about so it's not the first time that the country, for a lot of people, felt like a very precarious place. It felt like a place that was almost itching to break in a way. not trying to diminish what we're facing now, but I do think it is existential. But I think, especially the lawyers of color, we're kind of talking like this idea that the next election is everything's on the line. For some of my colleagues, it was the first time they said they ever felt that way. And the other colleagues were like, "Oh, it's felt that way every election for me. It's felt every election. I felt like this was the one that could break my family or save my family, and it's always felt that way." So I think there's a way in that the pain of America has almost been like democratized away. That a lot of people are feeling that uncertainty, and it's not good, but I think it is healthy in that it is a shared experience, and hopefully it'll be a shared solution.
Well, yeah, and that's something that we talk about here at All Saints, which is, vote for the most vulnerable. And maybe you are one of the most vulnerable, but either way, we need to all vote in a way that we are all in this together. I've got one more, and then I want to open it up to the audience here. You've sort of talked a little bit about sort of if Trump wins, this is sort of all over. There's many purposes to having a rule of law. One of them is to serve as a deterrent against bad behavior. If President Biden wins a second term, has there been enough of a deterrent with what has happened to those who engaged in what I hope is not the first, definitely wasn't the first insurrection, in the January 6th insurrection? Or are we looking at something like that again, or are we looking at something, maybe even worse? I mean, that's speculation, but I'm sort of interested from your vantage point.
Well, I think I would look at that probably in a couple different ways. I think if you're talking about the ground soldiers, right? If this was a criminal enterprise, the ground soldiers, I mean, the DOJ, this really has been like the largest DOJ investigation and prosecutions in history. You've had hundreds and hundreds, I think we're almost up to 1,000 folks now who have been arrested and charged in regard to the actual attack on the Capitol. So I think for those specific individuals, as we call it in law, specific deterrence, those individuals, a lot of people have been held to account about being at the Capitol and attacking police officers and all that. So I think for those individuals, I think there is a deterrence there. But then we have in the law what we call general deterrence, which is basically for everyone else. Does everyone else looking at this now say that I now know that this is a thing that I could get in trouble for because I saw someone else get in trouble for it? But I think my concern about the deterrence here is not about another January 6th, because I don't think that's what it would likely look like. And that I think practically we saw what January 6th looked like, or the Capitol looked like once Joe Biden came into office. I mean, right, for those who are in DC, the Capitol was basically barricaded. I mean, they put up fences around it for inauguration. Like, people were ready at that point. So I think there's a way in which we're often always prepared to fight the last fight that we already seen.
Right.
And I think what we have to do in this country is to have an imagination, which I think we often lack in the US, an imagination of what can go wrong, and be thinking about what does the next January 6th look like? Because it's not going to be another attack on the Capitol on January 6th. Right. It's going to be something else. And that's the work that has to be done to think about what does that look like? Are we scared about lone attacks or lone wolves? Right? That's a different kind of version than a big mass attack. So I think that's what I would hope that law enforcement currently is focused on and thinking about is that new iteration of what people might do.
Great, thank you. We can stay on in this group until about 10 o'clock. We'll say goodbye to the online people in a minute. I just want to turn it over. I want to give you the honor. Do you have a first question or anything, either one of you? Okay. Okay, I'll sort of open it up back here. I'm going to go back here and sort of work my way back. I'll be right back to you, John. And just say your name, too.
Hi, Crystal Jones. Can you guys hear me? Is this Crystal Jones? Thank you so much for being here and for how you ever got here. And I just hope that you run for office somewhere, somehow, and we will all vote for you and start you off with some fundraising. So that's all. No question.
Thank you. Thank you.
I'm very fearful about the future. The fact that Trump has so much influence on what's going on. Is my voice okay? No.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
We're all really worried about what's going to happen, but my feeling is absolutely those trials have to take place because we've got there's so many people who don't believe that Trump has done anything wrong. And I think the closer that we get to the election, there's potential for tremendous violence. And Russia is going to work as hard as they can to make sure that there's confusion in the election, that Trump gets elected. I think we've got to do more. I mean, I've been fantasizing about postponing the election until the trials take place. And I don't know what kind of authority the Justice Department has if they don't have the power the Supreme Court does. But there's so many different angles on this. But we've all suffered in all of this, and I want it to stop. We just have to save our country.
What is your, this is a better microphone, what is your sort of mix of hope and fear at this moment?
You know, I feel all the above. I think you have to have hope, because if you don't, then we're all done. And I think if you observe reality, you should have a good amount of fear as well. You know, I think as far as the elections, the trials happen before the election, you know, what will be. And we only have the DOJ, the mistakes that were made at the DOJ, in my view, were made by Attorney General Garland early on by not starting the Jack Smith special investigation right when he got into office, right? Jack Smith, though, has moved at a very quick pace for an investigation like this. Criminal investigations take a long time, and this is one of unmatched importance. So Jack Smith has moved as quickly as possible. As far as these trials happening before the election, either way, the election is going to be what matters. And by that I mean, I agree that the American people seeing Trump in court, like the criminal he is, sitting there day in and day out, even the optics of that, I think, will crystallize what he did more in people's minds, and that's important. But if he were convicted before the election, he's going to have appeals. There's no way he's going to be incarcerated before the election, so it's still going to matter what happens on election day, no matter what. There is no world that, he gets convicted and then, now Joe Biden is automatically the president again. No, the American people are still going to have to decide who the next president is. And as far as the timing, you know, it's if I were a betting man, we probably don't have any of the federal trials before the election, but it's not done yet. I mean, what Judge Chutkan, who's the judge in D.C. in the January 6th federal case, has said is that when they send it back to her, she's ready to go. And she's going to set the clock back on. There are 88 days that she has left to give them to prepare. And she said that the political calendar is not going to impact her calendar. The Department of Justice has said the political calendar is not going to impact them going forward in the other cases. So from that perspective, if the Supreme Court sends it back to her and allows the case to continue, the day it comes back, she says her clock starts. So I don't think we're done yet. And, you know, my optimistic side says there's a universe that the Supreme Court, presuming they say he doesn't have immunity, which is the one point, and two, they don't send it back down for further fact finding before they want to decide something else. Assuming they send it back cleanly to her, there's a world where he's going to trial right leading up to the election, that he's in trial perhaps in October or September, October. And I think that is, and I'm not a political, commentator, but the opposite of that, I think, will be at their strongest. That when Joe Biden is on the campaign trail, Trump is in a DC court answering to the crimes and having witnesses day in and day out explaining what he did. But again, with all that said, the election is where this will ultimately be decided for long-term accountability, because a conviction does not stop him. I think it changes the American view, the American public's perception, but nonetheless, he's going to be a man walking around on election day, and people on the ballot have to make the right choice.
Thank you. We're going to go ahead and say goodbye to the people online, but we can continue in here for 10 minutes or so. I've got another couple questions around.
Hi, thank you so much. I'm Catherine, and to your point about the Supreme Court, obviously they shouldn't be swayed, but as a people, can we write to them? Can we call our local news stations and ask them? I mean, can we have an impact in any way, in a good way?
Frankly, on the Supreme Court, no. The Supreme